I think with me, it always comes back to, and this goes back to being a little kid, is I always wanted to be heard. I always believed that I have, and I still believe this, that I have things that are important to say. And I have thoughts that are important. And I have a way of looking at the world that I think people would find interesting. And that goes all the way back to being a child. And I'm lucky because I've had many different ways to express that through writing, through acting, through producing, through directing.
Hey readers and writers, welcome to Season 2, Episode 11. Today I'm talking to Eric Paul Erickson. He's the author of the novel Ascension, and he's also the founder of Viking Dog Entertainment, a publishing company. Hi, Eric.
Hello.
So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name's Eric Erickson, and believe it or not, that's my real name. Apparently, there's some thought by certain people that I might not be talking to who think that it might not be, but it is. I'm a writer, former journalist, now novelist. I've written a number of nonfiction books and released my first novel, Ascension, which came out late last year. It's a science fiction adventure novel, sort of in the vein of the infamous Dan Brown hero on a quest prototype. It's about a group of scientists who discover that on the other side of death is actually not death, but it's an ascension to another plane of existence. And so it's an adventure novel about trying to discover the secrets of over there, how they've played into our history. There's always the nefarious dark group that wants to take over the power, so they have to go up against them. So it's a very page-turning adventure novel that I'm really proud of. So I just am trying to keep myself busy with that. I've also written a number of screenplays. You might or might not have seen some of the films if you like either art house films or Sci-Fi Channel Monster of the Week movies. It's up to you. But writing jobs, they aren't all Pulitzer Prize winning material, you may learn. Sometimes you write what you're paid to write to pay the rent.
I used to love those sci-fi movie of the week things. When I was in college, I watched them all the time.
Oh, you may have seen me getting eaten by something or something I wrote. Giant snake, giant dinosaur on space, or all those things. They're fun. They're fun. The funny thing is, since we're talking about writing, is when they approach you to write one, you have a formula that you're given. And it's much about, on page 6, this has to happen. On page 10, this has to happen. At this act break, you have to be to this point, even to the point where you get stock characters. It's like, I need this character. I need this character. It's funny.
That's why they kind of all feel the same.
They do. Plus they churn them out so quickly, and they look at it in a way where they're like, we have a proven model, whoever's buying it, whatever network is saying, well, we don't want you to try and surprise us. Don't recreate the wheel. Just, we know what sells. We know we want a movie about dinosaurs in space. Okay. So you got your archetypal, your hero character, and your character with a shady past, and your character that has an arc or whatever, and that's what they want. It's like romance novels. They sort of have the same kind of arc, or
right. You know how it's going to end when you start.
Yeah, I think there's a comfort to that though, as well. And there's old books that we all crack open and kind of slide into because we know exactly where the story is going to go.
Right.
Versus, you could throw in a little twist here or there, but there's a reason that they still write Harlequins. They all end the same way. It's like an episode of the Love Boat.
It's
before the
food.
Final commercial, they're going to break up and get back together. That's just
right. Great example. So I want to deviate a little bit to the novel. How did you come up with the idea?
I started it about 10 years ago, and it started as a very immature attempt at writing a novel. And okay. I mean that because I had written 2 other books before I wrote that, and they quickly ended up in a drawer. And I pulled out one of them a couple months ago, and I thumbed through it, and it went quickly back into that drawer because I looked at it and I'm like, is this salvageable?
Mm-hmm.
It was called, I've never told anybody about this. So the only person who knows about this is my ex-wife. So now you're going to know too. And all your
And
listeners,
all the listeners.
all of the listeners are like, oh my gosh, I'm never reading one of his books again. I had been working for the Chicago Tribune as a reporter,
Mm-hmm.
and I left, and I was really burned out because it can really take a lot out of you. You're going to murder scenes, and you're going to crime scenes, and you're going
I've
to
heard
every night
that.
going to the morgue. And, after a while, you either turn into an alcoholic or you leave,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And I left, and I wanted to turn all my experiences into a book. And I'd read, I haven't thought about this forever. I had just read one of Jimmy Buffett's books, the
I didn't know
Margaritaville
Jimmy
guy.
Buffett had written a book.
I think he's written about a half dozen at this point.
Okay.
And he writes they're actually very entertaining. They're kind of like detective novels, but they're very loose. They're very Jimmy Buffett. They're very like
Mm-hmm.
the
Laid back.
hero is was it Joe Merchant? He's like he has a plane and he flies around the Keys and he drinks margaritas, and it's probably
Okay.
just wish fulfillment for Jimmy.
Right.
But I liked it, and I liked that kind of style. So I wrote a book called Slipping the Samsara, and as I go back and read it now, it was so self-indulgent. It was so just like, look what I can write. Oh my gosh, this is an amazing sentence.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, what an amazing allegory.
Mm-hmm. We've all been
and
there.
yeah, and there's a reason it went into a drawer. And it was more of an experiment. It was more of a diary. It was more of a journal. It was more of I have all this angst and this young energy. I need to get it out. How am I going to get out? I'm going to get it out in a book. And even as I was thumbing through it, I could see how I started getting bored with myself toward the end of the book, because then I started, well, I need plot. Well, I need
Mm-hmm.
character development. I need arcs. But it
Mm-hmm.
just, as I look at it now, I'm like, that was a wonderful experiment. That was a writing exercise, and back in the drawer. So when I eventually got to the point where I wanted to write Ascension, I really wanted to explore this idea about, I've always been fascinated by death, but not fascinated in this like weird gothic way. Like, I don't like skulls. I don't like any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's just something about the way as a society we deal with it, or we avoid it, or we have ceremonies about it, or all of that kind of stuff has just always fascinated me. I'm always fascinated by the machinations that people do and the
Mm-hmm.
ceremonies and everything. Like, I'm not a big religion guy, but the Catholic Church fascinates me because of all the ceremonies and all the,
I can see
the
that.
fancy clothes and all,
Mm-hmm.
the jewel encrusted whatevers. So I was interested in this idea, if we take away the concept of death and talk about the actual physical, take away the idea of the morbidity of it, take away the idea of the religion of it, and come up with the actual physical act. Because in the book, the way they're actually able to cross over from this world to the other side is they are actually able to tap into the physical changes that happen to a body when it goes through death, and they're actually able to use that as the key to jump to this new world. So
Okay.
they find it, the MacGuffin is that they are able to, when people have a near death experience, their DNA is changed by that near death experience. So the scientists are able to find that change in the DNA and use that as the key to
Okay.
access this other world. So I wanted to base it in some sort of science. Is it real? No, but
Mm-hmm.
for my purposes, it is.
I don't think
And
any science in a book is real, unless you're talking
yeah,
about like The Martian or something.
yeah, exactly. So, but I wanted it to be believable. I wanted it to be
Mm-hmm.
be like, oh, wait a minute, that makes sense. Okay. Does it really work? No, but I could at least make those logical jumps of like
Right.
this to that to that to that to that. So when I first wrote it, it was very metaphysical. It was very like, these people going on this journey, and it didn't have the action bent to it, so it went into a drawer.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled it out a couple years ago, and I started reading it, and I'm like, okay, well, the story's there, the idea's there. It just needs to be more exciting, and it needs to be paced better, and it needs to have arcs, and at the end of every chapter
It
I
needs
want
to
it
have
to
better
be like,
story structure.
thank you, exactly. So I tore it apart and changed characters. I changed the sexes on characters. I changed their ethnicities, and that plays into the story, and just really tore it apart and put it back together.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really amazed with, because the core was there, the concept was there, and I was happy with that, that I was able to then find the story structure. I had a playwriting teacher in college who explained it really, really well. She says, you're going on a journey from A to Z, but you don't have to go A, B, C, D, E. You can go A, G, T, V, Y, then to Z. It doesn't have to be a
Mm-hmm.
direct line. It's up to you as the storyteller to figure out that path. So
Right.
when you pull it apart and you look at it, you're like, oh wow, and that's a different way to go about it. It's like, I'm not a big fan of movies when they're like, they do they do the jump. We go into the movie at the very beginning, and they're like, something happens, and then the key comes up and it says 24
Uh-huh.
hours earlier. I'm not
Right.
a big fan of that. It there are times it works, but I feel like it gets kind of crutchy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's something that you
I feel like it
rely
works
on too
better in a
much.
novel than it does in a movie.
I think there's an interesting way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That brings it. I'm working on a book now. I wrote a novella called Virginia Dare, Field of Honor, which is available now. Those are my little plug.
Okay.
But it's a novella, but the main, it's a science fiction novel, but it's the main character has the ability to, one of her many abilities is to travel in time. So
Okay.
one of the story structure issues has been, how can I tell this story that takes place in multiple times throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
but the through line is still, it's happening to these people and still affecting them, even though we're jumping around in time and place, and there's other people that it's not happening to at the same time. They might be
Mm-hmm.
moving at different paces.
That is an
And that's
interesting
been
concept.
challenging. Yeah, it's been challenging. I think I've cracked it, but it's still a challenge to kind of go back in and make sure that the reader is along for the ride. You want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they're up to speed. It's that whole idea, if you've seen it too many times and suddenly you forget that somebody else has to go on that same journey that
Right.
you're creating.
I'm actually kind of
So,
experiencing something similar. I write 3 books at a time. One of them is it's sci-fi, but it's more have they basically a then and a now structure. So
mhm.
every other chapter is a then and every other chapter is a now. But like they start not quite at opposite ends, but then they meet in the middle at the end. They meet the timelines meet in the middle at the end of the book, if that makes sense.
That makes no, I've seen that. I've seen that done. And
Mm-hmm.
it's and if you're setting up a pattern where it's an alternating one after
Right.
another, then that's nice, because then
Mm-hmm.
you're teaching your audience, here's the rules of our universe. We're gonna go back
Right.
and forth, back and forth, back and
But it
forth.
is definitely challenging to get that down and make it work at the same time. Like make sure, like
Yeah.
as the reader, it works for the reader. Make sure they like, I know what's going on in my head, but you have to kind of take an outsider standpoint and figure out, is this make sense to a third party?
Yeah, and that's, we forget that, I think sometimes. I think we forget it when we're younger writers, and I think as we get older, if you're lucky enough to keep writing and
Mm-hmm.
actually have your stuff get out into the world, because I know we all know writers who've written 20 books, but none of them have ever seen the light of day for whatever
Mm-hmm.
reason. But
I
you
probably have
start to
15 in
you
my
have
drawer right now.
well, yeah, but you have some out there. But there's that, it's that idea that we forget that we're not writing for ourselves, you're writing for an audience.
Mm-hmm.
And while there is that artistic angsty kind of side where it's like, no, I must Lord Byron this and get these words out because I the venom of my soul, or that kind of thing. but you're still writing for an audience. You want the person to enjoy the book, to go along for the ride. And that's why sometimes when I get to the editing process, and this happened with Ascension, definitely, there's nothing better when I sit down with it and I stop taking notes. It's annoying on one level because I'm like, oh my God, I'm not paying attention to I missed a comma or I missed some kind of dang thing. But at the same
When
time,
you
if
just
I'm
start
getting
reading
swept
it.
up, exactly. If
Uh-huh.
I'm reading it, if I'm swept up in the story, if I'm being propelled, then I'm like, I'm on to something. And I'm like, and even if somebody comes in later on, like, well, I don't like the way this paragraph went. I'm like, yeah, screw it. It's like, you know what? That's the way I'm telling the story. And you're either on board or you're not. And I think, we're not going to nitpick it down. You're not going to start doing focus groups on a book and being like, well, I didn't care for page 14 because, this comma should have been at the end of this sentence or whatever. I'm editing. My company Viking Dog, we're publishing a book called Dead People.
Okay.
And it's look, I got the proofs actually. um and the reason I bring that up is because it's been interesting, because Douglas Rappaport, he's the writer, and he's got a really, really specific way that he writes. And he, first of all, it's in first person, which creates its own problems from an editing point of view.
No,
And
I understand this. Basically all my work starts in first person. I always have to transition it to third person at some point.
I
It
have
just stops
tried.
working for me.
I'm the same way. I've tried several times to work on projects in first person, and it never comes together.
Yeah, I can never quite do it right.
But he's got, so here's here's a hurdle as the publisher that I came up against. So he loves to use ellipses at the end of a sentence. It's just his style, like the trail off.
Right.
And it seems really simple, but so technically, is it 3? Is it 4? Is there a space here? Is there a space there? And if you look at it from an editing point of view, technically it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, and then a period or an exclamation point at the end of the sentence. That's the AP style correct way. But I'm reading it and I'm like, that doesn't work, because technically he's trailing off. His character's in first person. So he's trailing off a thought. So there wouldn't be a period at the end of that sentence, because it's like a dialogue from a film.
Right.
It's literally trailing off. So I know, as we're getting through the process, I know there's going to be an editor out there somewhere who said, wait a second, this is not done correctly. This should have it. And I'm going to fight him on that as the publisher. And I'm going to be like, no, because this is the way someone's talking. This is literally, I want you to hear their voice. And this is how Douglas is writing it. You don't want to put a capper on it.
Is it all like train of thought like that? The whole
pretty
book,
much,
or is it just pieces?
No, it's the whole, so it's called Dead People, and it's a very, I compare it to it's like Chuck Palahniuk meets Douglas Adams. It's with a little bit of Sam Spade. It's about in the future, aliens come to the world and realize how much we effed it up. Okay. And so they say, you have effed up this planet so badly that we're gonna reboot it. Okay. We're gonna restart it. But when they restart it, they do it incorrectly. And this is where the comedy kind of comes in. And they restart it, but they bring back people from all throughout history, and buildings from all throughout history, and society from all through. So you're walking down the street, and there might be somebody who's from the 2020s next to somebody from the 1600s next to somebody from the Stone Age. And there's the Apple store is right next to a building from 500 years ago. And they kind of the aliens kind of go, whoops. So the main character, to rectify this, they delineate, they grab people and they give them the job of being hitmen. And their job is to kill the people who shouldn't have come back because they're bad people. Hitler, John Wayne Gacy, people like that. And they get points. based on the
I have
value
so
of
many
these
questions
targets.
about this book suddenly. Like, how do you
It's
know when
coming
these
out
people
November
came
2nd.
back? Okay.
Um,
I'll have to read it.
so, depending on how many points you get, once you hit a certain number, which you don't know, it's a mysterious number, you get to bring back somebody that you want to bring back, because they didn't bring back everybody. They only brought back a certain number, but they did bring back so many
Okay.
people. So the main character wants to bring back his mother, but he's a horrible assassin, so he can't earn the points. So but it's all told in first person, and it's got kind of a Sam Spade kind of like, I walked into the room and I did this and I did that. And
Okay.
I really like Douglas's voice. And that's why when it came across my desk, I was like, I would love to publish this. I want to be part of this. I think there's a voice here that needs to be heard. I think it's a unique story. It's presented uniquely. It's really quirky. And that's what I love about it. Like, his handler is his talking dog named Socrates, but it's spelled Socrates, like socks tees.
Right.
And it's one of the things that always makes me laugh when I'm going through it is like, the dog can't pick up the phone, so it always needs help to like dial the phone to call him because it doesn't have any thumbs. It's like, that's
I need
the
to read this book
quirkiness
now.
of the book. So, but it presented editing problems. It definitely presented, like, because of Doug's voice, because of the way that he's writing it first person, because of his style, you look at it and you're like, okay, well, how do I want this to read? And all those years at the Tribune and other papers and having editors slam certain style into my head, it's kind of like fun to be like, no, this is how we're going to tell this story, because this is how it presents itself, and this is going
Right.
to entertain the reader. So November 2nd,
I'll
we'll
look
get
out
you a
for
copy.
it. Okay. Hook me up with the author too. Sounds like he'd be a fun guy to talk to.
He's out on the East Coast too. He's out near DC, so
Nice.
be on the same
Easier
time
to talk
zone.
to.
There you go. Us West Coasters.
We got seriously off track, but I have a couple more questions. What does your writing routine look like as an author? Like, how do you structure your day?
It's every day is different. I definitely have to lock down times. There were times, when I was doing the final edits on Ascension, it was the beginning of COVID. So that made life a little easier to say, okay, I need 6 hours to sit down and do it. When
luckily you don't have any place to go.
Yeah. Oh, I went weeks without. The only person I talked to was the clerk at the grocery store, literally, because I live alone. So that was easier. When I was younger, I would stay up late and I would write until like 3-4 in the morning, and then I would sleep in late. But I just don't do that anymore. Now it's like, I set a goal, like I want this chapter done, or I want this many pages done. And usually I'll hit that goal and then go past it. Usually I don't have a problem.
Are these like weekly goals that you're setting for yourself?
Normally it's a daily goal and then a weekly goal.
Okay.
So for example, I'm working on, and I think I'm like you, I have 4 or 5 different book projects that I have.
Sometimes you just need to switch it up and think about something else for a while.
Oh, absolutely. I can use, unless I'm getting down to like the wire, unless I'm like, okay, well, I'm finishing this project.
Right. It's so close to being done, you might as well just finish it.
Yeah. And then you got to set it aside for a little while and let it simmer. Usually it's about a week that I can work on one, and then I have to shift to something else. There's some times where I just wake up and I'm like, I can't deal with that world today. I have to deal with, but sometimes there's a difference between, sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes it's avoidance, and you have to know what the difference is, because I have some projects that are like really, really, really in the early stages. It's not even writing at this point. It's still outlining.
Okay.
And there'll be some, so like I have one, it doesn't, some of these projects, you wake, I don't want to get too many books out, and the people are like, what books he talking about? Which one? What? There's some that are still very in the outline plotting stages. and you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't really, I'm in this one that I'm working on, and I'm on page 300 and I'm almost done, but I just don't want to work on that today. What am I going to work on? Oh, well, I'll work on this one that's really in the planning stages. Well, technically I'm not writing. Technically I'm just doing the fun stuff that comes with the research and all that. And that's important, but it can easily become avoidance.
Yes, it can be a downward spiral that you never get out of.
Yeah. How many people you hear about, oh, I'm still working research on my book. Oh, how long have you been doing that? Oh, 10 years. Yeah, that's not research. That's
that's not actually writing your book. That's just on the internet.
Yeah. And there's some days where, like, when I first started, there definitely was this part of me, especially when I was in college and around that time, where you have to write progressively. You have to write, you start on page 1 and you're right through, the idea of skipping around was never. And just to show my age. So when I started writing, like, I wrote my first plays and stuff that I had written that were actually produced was like I was 15, 16, 17 years old. Okay. So I was still writing on a typewriter.
Awesome.
So the concept of skipping around was like, you didn't do it.
That would be really difficult. Yeah.
So now
you
lose
the paper halfway through and you're like, wait, where did that chapter go? I wrote 6 months ago.
Exactly. I still have in some box, I still have like old typewritten manuscripts from like,
that's awesome.
They're getting really kind of scary looking. But now it's, I'll sit down and I might go, okay, well, I know my character is going to do something later in the book or later in the script. And I know how I want that scene to go. I know the general idea, but I need to get those ideas out and just logged in, so then I can take them out of my head. Because if they're in your head, they're still just going to rattle around around.
Or until you lose them.
And that happens to me all the time.
That's the worst.
I'm a huge, I have so many like notebooks and more notebooks. And
I got to keep one like notebooks in my nightstand, because the best ideas come as I'm like trying to fall asleep. And if I don't write it down by the morning, it's gone. Exactly.
Yeah, I have that too. I have in there. I have another one. They're scattered all over the house, and so you have to remember them, but you also got to get them out, because if they just keep rattling around in your head, you can't move on to something else. And so what I'll do is I'll sit down and be like, okay, well, somewhere around chapter 30. I know she's going to go visit this person, for example. So I'll sit down, I have kind of the general idea, and I'll sit down and I'll go, all right, well, she walks in the house and she sees this person and she says hello, and wow, that's exciting. But then I'll be like, but what if she says this? And then what if she says this? And the next thing you know, it's 2 hours later and I just wrote the chapter. Right. That happens all the time. And it might not be perfect.
Does that chapter then fit into the rest of the story, or do you find you're editing it a lot as you catch up to it?
I find that usually the concept of it, usually the way it's set up, the core of the idea or the core of the conflict or the core of whatever's going on, that stays. There are times when I'm like, oh God, yeah, I don't need this anymore. But that's later on. But I may change. One thing that changes a lot, it changes in the one I'm working on now, is like, what's the motivation walking in? I still need that person to learn something, achieve something,
change
have
in some
contact
way
with somebody. Yeah, there's something that has to be accomplished in that chapter or that situation or that scene.
It's positioned in the story arc.
Right. But the motivations might change. And if the motivations change, then the interactions change. But the situation and the event is still there. So if it's a movie, it's the same kind of thing. Like, we'll use the example of the sci-fi films, which is not a great example, but we're going to use it. Is, that bridge, your two characters have to be on that bridge when the giant shark attacks and takes down the bridge and kills the boyfriend.
Right.
Okay, that's got to happen. But what did they do walking into that? Like, now that you've written everything of their journey getting onto that bridge, are they
Mm-hmm.
fighting? Are they happy? Did they just learn that they're getting engaged, or did they find out one cheated on? Whatever.
Right.
So you still have them attacked on that bridge, and you can even have the same dialogue if you're attached to the dialogue, or if there's certain information coming out.
Mm-hmm.
But that'll change. But it's still, you're bringing more information into it. But the core concept of that tent pole, or whatever you want to call it, is still there. Now you
Mm-hmm.
may run. There are times where I've gone back and I went. This happened with Ascension, where I had scenes, and I was like, that's a great scene, but it's similar to this one,
Right.
or at this point, it doesn't push the story forward. It's still kind of cool. You know what? Grab that, put it in your orphans file, and use it
Yeah.
for the sequel, or for some other
Mm-hmm.
project, and whatever. But if nothing else, you're writing, and
Mm-hmm.
you're coming up with ideas, and you learn about the characters. And I know one of your questions is what I call, is eventually, if not now, but eventually, is the whole Jack Kerouac idea,
Mm-hmm.
that you just sit down hopped up on something, and hammer out A to Z, and just see where your characters take you.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I've tried that, and it doesn't work for me. Any author that can do that and come up with a finished product, more power to you.
Mm-hmm.
But my experience has been, the more often that an author publishes or finishes a project, the less they do that. Because you may not be a fan of James Patterson, you may not be a
I've got
fan
a
of
30 book author who will disagree with you, but
Dave. You
I'm
know what?
generally agree
Let's
with you
go.
myself.
That's But I'm like, but it's to a degree. Like, you cannot tell me, and your 30 book author can argue with me. I'm all for it.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you sit down and you say, you know what, I'm going to write this story about this character, and she's going to tell me where she's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot tell me that you don't have an inkling of where they're going to end up, at least
Yeah, I think
something.
he calls himself a pantser, but he does have it in his head where he wants the story to go the whole time.
Okay, so you're still
It's
plotting it
not
out,
just
even if it's
blind.
rough.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's the six characters in the search of an author kind of like thing that we all think is like, oh, well, this archetype's going to go this way and this way, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll tell me. And that's when you go back and you read it, and you're like, it's not tight. It's not.
It
There's
wanders. Yeah.
nothing wrong with figuring out that path,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And more. Hey, more power to any author that can sit down. But I'll also bet you that it takes them longer. They have to do more
Possibly.
rewrites. They
It's probably
really
more
go
editing
back, and
too.
sorry.
It's probably more editing too.
Oh, I
Like
would think it would be a huge
editing
thing.
his story structure, just moving things around like post-it notes.
Yeah. And there's a romantic notion to that. And I get it. I get it. I
Mm-hmm.
used to have the billboard I had a chalkboard with, like, I'd put up ideas and the whole thing. But that
Mm-hmm.
kind of led me to how I do it.
Right.
And I'm not saying
No,
that
everybody's got to
that the
find their own way that works with their brain and their creativity to get their story out. There's no one set
exactly,
way.
especially if you're working with a very intricate story. So
Mm-hmm.
Ascension, for example, Ascension, I've got basically six characters that each have their own arc. They each have their own agendas. They each have their own part they have to play in the story. They have certain things they have to do in order to push the story forward, because it's an action adventure. You've
Mm-hmm.
got cliffhangers at the end of every uh, chapter. You've got situations where you get halfway through and then something comes up and you're like, oh my God, I remember that happened back. There's these eggs that are
Right.
planted through it. So for me to sit down and just be like, "Da, da, 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 where are these guys going?" Impossible. It's just
Mm-hmm.
impossible. So the way I've done it is it all goes back to, I used to have a giant chalkboard in my office,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I started doing it. I makes these circles,
Okay.
and they can be chapters, they can be beats, they can be chunks,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And it starts small. It usually will start with like 8 of them. It's like, here's my character, here's what he's going to do, Here's who he's going to run into. Here's the conflict. Here's what he learns, whatever I'm doing. And then those 8 will become 10, and become 20, become 30. And there's some I know there's ones where I have dozens and dozens and dozens, and I'll break it down to not just the chapter, but the actual beats in the chapter. And now I have a big, it's getting small. I need to get a new one. It's a big roll of butcher paper, and I roll it out on the floor, and I get down the floor with colored pens, and I'll use them for, I get right into it. And I'm like, okay, well, this leads to this, and this leads to this. And and then the great thing is like, oh no, well, this chapter, we'll move it back here, and then you scratch it in. And
there's something good about doing it visually like that. I mean, there's something like, I used to like the Post-it note method. That's why I brought it up, because that's what I like to do. Like, you have this big, I used to use a big sheet of paper, yellow Post-it notes, and then you write down the ideas and you get more Post-it notes and more, but you just can rearrange them so easily.
Yeah.
To make it fit in like your plot structure.
I like the Post-it notes, and I have used them on top of it sometimes. One of the things that I do really like about my method with the paper is I can make side notes on my beats. So if I'm in chapter 5, I'll write the basics of like, this is the chapter where my hero meets the mentor or whatever. And then off to the side, I can make a note, be like, make sure that, we learn about such and such in this chapter, or this, consider adding, this to the chapter, or this ties into chapter 15. So I have all of those side notes in one place. And
how do you reference a huge sheet of butchered paper? Like, I'm imagining something like 30 feet long that you've just rolled out and written on.
It's they end up being about 20 feet long by the time they roll. They roll out. They start smaller. Usually there's, I got them packed away. Usually they go through different versions. I'll probably go through 5 or 6, and then I'll even get to the point where like the book's written, and I'll still go back and be like, okay, I'm having an issue with the plot structure. And let me remind myself what the journey is my reader's going on. So I'll sit down and I'll be like, chapter 1, here's what happens. Chapter 2, here's what happens. And then by visually looking at it like a flow chart, it's basically a flow chart.
Yeah, I actually have moved on to the whole like unorganized list with bullet points within bullet points within bullet points. That's my current outline structure.
It's the visual that helps me. It's like, I think it's basically a PowerPoint presentation for an old person, I guess, is kind of
there is something nice about doing it physically and visually, but even if I start that way, I end up transcribing into my unorganized list of bullet points.
Well, as long as it gets to where you got to go. It's depending on how your mind works. It's like, we all have different ways of learning. We all have different ways of organizing our thoughts.
Right.
It's funny because I'll take like, you take a course or you take a class in like time management or, self-improvement, or it's one of these types of things. And they're like, oh, well, here's how you have to organize your stuff. And it's like, that doesn't work for me. That just,
you'd be like, that's a pain in the ass. I don't want to do that.
Way. Yeah. So like, here's an example. So I took Muay Thai, Muay Thai boxing, and you would have different instructors. And I had one instructor, they're all cool, but they all teach you differently. And one of them, his way of doing it was he would grab your arms and show you, physically move you into the position. That doesn't work for me. I'm like, you putting me into a place, I'm not learning how to do it.
Other than hitting your microphone.
I know, wham, just my spit, my pop guard. And then there's others where they're like, copy me, look at what I'm doing. I'm like, okay, well, that works a little bit for me better. And then there's other ones where it's through repetition, and they're like, no, tweak this. And that works for me over and over and over and over. And it's the same with writing. If you have an instructor who sits down, whether you're in college or a class, or God, you could be in 5th grade, and they say, this is how you have to do it. This is the way that you do it if you want to be a writer. They are one of the worst teachers on the face of the planet, because
they're too rigid.
There's things you need to learn. You need to learn grammar. You need to learn commas. You need to learn like certain things.
You need to find your voice first. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Do you
so
subscribe? Oh, I was going to try to steer us over to our topic. I was like, do you subscribe to the 3-act or the 4-act story structure?
when it comes to novels,
Yes.
I don't. I really
I understand the 4 works
I
better where like a play or screenplay. Uh, I don't know. What
when
do
it
you
comes to
use?
screenplays, I'm definitely a believer in the 3-act structure.
Okay.
I think it just works better.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that I haven't written other ways, and it doesn't mean that I
Right.
think there's other ways. It's just when you're right, most of my experience for writing screenplays has been Fast and Furious, and I wish I meant the movie series. I mean the action,
Right.
because I would be getting paid a lot better. But usually it's like we need the script as fast as possible. There's
Mm-hmm.
usually certain, like we talked about, characters, other things that are in it. I've
Mm-hmm.
had times where I literally have been hired to write scripts for, like, you have a week. You
Wow.
know, you've got
How
6
long is the
days.
script? Like, are you
90
writing
page 90 pages.
like a 2-hour movie script?
It's a minute. A film script is a minute a page. So if
Okay.
it's a 90-minute movie, it's a 90 page script.
Oh,
Um
wow. A week.
and yeah, and like my on a good day,
Mm-hmm.
so my process for writing scripts, I hope we're not, it's still writing.
It's still
Um
writing.
so
I don't
so for
discriminate.
me so for me it's like the first 20-30 pages are a snap.
Mm-hmm.
That's because all the issues, everything comes out. And then the
Right.
next like 20-30, they're like, it's not as easy, but it's still not tough. But then that last like 30 pages, that last like bit, that's the
Mm-hmm.
hardest part for me. And so when somebody comes up and they're like, okay, you got a week or you got 2 weeks, I'll sit down and I can do about 20 pages a day. And that's my comfort zone. You know, after about
Mm-hmm.
20 pages, I feel like I'm starting to stretch it a little bit, or the quality
Okay.
kind of goes down. But if, they're like, you got 6 days, you sit down, you're like, I hammer out 30 pages the first day, 30 pages the second day. If I'm lucky enough to have had time to do an outline, which a lot of times they require an outline before you can start
Mm-hmm.
writing, that makes it a little easier, because you're like, I know I
Right.
have to get here, I know I have to
Right.
get there.
You know your game
Um,
plan.
yeah, yeah, and that's what I think, like, people don't realize when it comes to the film world, film and television, is it's very processed. It's very there's a way they do it. Now, there's exceptions like these art films and amazing Academy Award winning films, and there's always an exception. But when it comes
Mm-hmm.
down to a television series, or it comes down to, there's a reason that they have the feel that they do. And a lot of the times that's because there's a process that they go through. You're taught to write the 3-act structure, or you're taught to write a
Okay.
4-act structure or 5 acts for TV,
Okay.
you
I was
know.
I was surprised by your answer because I was at, le- at least from my point of view, I always was picture films more as a 4-act story structure versus the 3-act, with that
Uh,
midpoint right in the middle.
well, what I do is the ones that I've done are usually 5 or 6 acts,
Oh, really?
because you write for because the movies that like when you write movies for like the sci-fi ones, the ones that air on TV, they're
Mm-hmm.
basically extended television shows. So your
Mm-hmm.
act break is your commercial break.
Oh, I suppose that's true.
So
I hadn't thought about commercials
so
in that structure. That
yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. So now when it comes to film, so when I have a film that I wrote and directed called Truth, which is 2 actors in a single room
Mm-hmm.
for in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So that one, I definitely did not follow the 3-act structure. It's more of a 4-act structure, but it's still kind of loose. And I would actually argue that there's mini acts within
Okay.
the actual structure, because you have 2 actors and you have to kind of keep things bouncing.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't keep going for 20
Right. You don't
30
have a lot of
minutes.
wiggle room there.
Yeah. So it became, and then that's just writing it. Then once you actually film it, it became something different because of the performances and the way it was edited in order to keep the
Mm-hmm.
action going forward. Um, as far as books go, I don't really I don't really subscribe to an act structure.
Okay.
Ascension was it broke down into parts, but that was only because I wanted to make it more accessible. It wasn't actually, and when I say accessible, it's like the first part, there's a prologue that takes place in one geographic location. Then there's another section that takes place in another geographic location, and so on and so forth. So I
Mm-hmm.
broke it down by geographic location because that's pretty much where everything was going on. So it
Right.
wasn't about the action, it was about the location, and that's how I broke it down.
So you're just keeping things like the, I don't know, like the inciting incident, like in your head, like, this belongs in this section of the story, and like the rising tension, like you just kind of just know in your head where it needs to go since you're not using a specific structure.
Well, that's when I go back to my butcher paper,
Okay.
because I'm visually looking at this map
Mm-hmm.
of the story. I don't pay attention to the structure as much, the act structure. I pay attention. I can literally now physically, visually see the flow of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look at those as beats, and almost like a heartbeat monitor, think of it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing if there's a gap in my story structure, the action's going to drop. So I can
Right.
actually see in front of me on this flow chart that it's moving forward. There's something happen. It's like the old Keystone Cops thing, cut to the chase, cut to the
Mm-hmm.
chase. So if I'm looking at it, even without reading the book, if I'm reading the book, it's obvious. I'm like, okay, this is dragging. But if I can
Right.
look at the overall structure and be like, wow, nothing really happens between this beat and this beat,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I need
It's too
something
long of
else
a
in
gap.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
can
So
see
that
that.
helps me. That's the way it goes. I don't know. I think act structure for books. So I think for some books, I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there may be a subliminal act structure that goes into it.
Right.
But I
Just
don't I
so
don't
used
think
to
it's
it.
overt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't, but we all have that. It's all,
Mm-hmm.
every great story is only one of, what's the old thing, there's only 7 types of
Right. I've actually heard
stories
there's
or
only
whatever it
one
is.
universal story and we're all telling the same one over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. So there's, like, without giving anything away in Ascension, there's definitely there's reveals and there's twists and there's,
Mm-hmm.
but you do want them at the later point in the book. You don't want, in the first 20 pages, give away all the twists and give away all
Right.
the secrets, and then you go, okay,
Well,
well, you
you won't
got
have any of the
320 pages
tension
to
build at
go.
that point, so it wouldn't
Right.
mean as much to the reader.
Exactly. And I think most of them will put it down and be like, I can't believe I just spent X amount of dollars on that book.
Yeah.
Forget Eric Erickson, that fake name and everything.
I think
It's
I think I use the story structure personally. It's more my outline mode. Like I actually have a template that I've written up and like, okay, this needs to happen in these 2 chapters, like heading, like these 2 chapters, and then I can outline it out. But I think that's where I use it. But it's more like a reminder, like, don't forget, this is what needs to happen. Make sure you hit that point before you move on.
I'd agree with that. I think I definitely think there's things that you have to make sure are in there, and they have to be at certain places, or else
Mhm.
it's not going to be a good story.
Right. I tend to
Um,
wander if I don't have those. I just kind of meander off in these weird directions that ultimately have to get cut because they don't help the plot at all.
right, right, and that's one thing they tell you when you're writing films is every single line. Man, if I had a nickel for every script I'd read, where within the first 10 minutes I'm like, what's happening? There's
Mm-hmm.
like 2 people just sat in a coffee shop and talked for 2 pages and said absolutely nothing. It's the idea that
Right.
every
Everything has to
every
move that plot forward.
exactly, every line of dialogue, there has to be a reason for that. And when you're writing a book, and again, this is just me, and I know there's authors out there that I even enjoy that would disagree, but I really feel like every line has to push that. There has to be a reason to be
Mm-hmm.
there. And if you start, if while it might be nice as an author, and this goes back to the book, the book that got shoved in my drawer, and this is a lesson that I learned, is it's fine as an author to point something out. They're walking through a scene and you make a mention of the tree, because it sets the mood of where they're walking through. But I don't need to read 2 paragraphs about that tree and where the bark is from and how long it's been
Unless
sitting
that
there and
tree
what
is really
color it is.
important later on.
Well, yeah, but if it's, if the whole, if it's, the giving tree, then yeah, I want to hear about it before it gets cut down and gives the kid all of his stuff. But, I've seen that so many times where people get hung up in that. And I mean, and here's an example. Like, so I grew up reading Tom Robbins, a lot of his work.
Okay.
And Tom, I went to high school with his son, and that's how I was introduced to his work. And at the time, I'm 17, 18 reading this stuff. And I'll be honest, I was bored out of my mind, but I'm like, I know I should like this. And
Okay.
as I got older, I realized that he's very descriptive, and he's very setting but that's his lyrical language, and that's the way he writes, and he's really good at it. And that's, what he
Right.
became known for. I think, and I suffered this, and I think a lot of young authors do, and some not so young. Instead of finding their own voice, they try to emulate their favorite authors. And I remember growing up, like, I'm going to write like Tom, and
Right.
writing these flowery things that was just like, there's terminology for it, and I won't get into it because some of it's a little flowery, but it's self-serving. It's if you're writing poetry, you're writing poetry. If you're writing something like Tom, then he has a very special way that he does it, and there's a reason that he's serving.
That even happens to me now. I'll be reading a book that I'm loving the book, and then I find that somehow that author's way of describing and talking about within their own writing has somehow morphed into mine. Like, I suddenly hear their tone in my story. I'm like, wait, nope. I either have to stop reading it or stop writing while I'm reading the book.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's like music. It's like you want to learn and try stuff, but you still have to have your own voice.
Yes.
And if suddenly your music sounds like Coltrane, maybe you should listen to something else for a while. And
exactly. Yeah. Just step back. Either like for one or the other. Either I have to stop reading the book that's amazing and keep writing, or I stop writing until I finish the book and then give myself like a brain refresher. So just kind of like reboot my brain.
But do you ever have the opposite happen, where like there's an author that you enjoy, except maybe there's one or two things about the way they write that always drive you up the wall? And so you're like, hey, at least I know when I write, I'm not going to do what they did on that.
Yes.
There's a couple authors who do that, and like every time I'm just like, like, I'm not going to do that when I write.
I have this thing about physical description and characters. I'm not a fan. I don't need to know what somebody's hair color or eye color is unless it's important to the plot.
Oh, the mirror. When they walk up to the mirror and they describe, that's how you learn about the character, because they're looking in the miror.
Right. Yeah. I don't need to know how your hair's done, or, I don't need, I have a big pet peeve about that. I don't like it. And it throws me off when people put that in their work. And I just like, wait, okay. All right. Step back.
One thing that I do, and in Ascension I did it, is my main character has really, I liked the fact that he had really striking blue eyes. So it was one thing. And especially because their eyes
appearance, it's not like you're not giving a physical description.
Yeah, I threw in a couple, you throw in a little bit of a description, the athletic and the this and that, but it's not like 3 paragraphs. No,
it's not like a police arrest record. Yeah, it's not
exactly.
You don't need all of that unless it's super important.
Yeah, but I think if there's like one thing, then I think that, and that you can work in, because like, so my character, my lead, he had very striking blue eyes. So in conversations with people, that plays in, because we talk, we look into people's eyes. So that naturally organic would come into the description. If if I said, well, he had one ear that was bigger than the other, and then suddenly I mentioned through the whole story that like the people are looking at his ears going, I don't understand what's wrong with this guy's head. That might not be, unless he was like, that was like a weird character thing or something. But I get it. Yeah, it's always that weird scene where they're like, she stopped in front of the mirror and adjusted her blonde hair. It fell loosely around her neck, which was a very
Right. I
petite neck.
don't.
And it's like,
Yeah.
we're just gonna do an
You don't
inventory
need
from head
that.
to toe, aren't we? I hate that. I'm with you.
I actually the novel I'm publishing it actually is important what the character looks like, and it drove me up the wall, like, because my instinct is to not do that, don't show it, let the reader just put in their own idea, and I had to like shoehorn it in, just like because I was uncomfortable with it, but it was important, so it had to happen.
Were you happy with the way that you were able to do it?
Yeah,
Did
I
it feel
kind of
organic?
it felt okay. I was still uncomfortable talking about how like the dark hair, but it was basically they ended up being sort of like clones of each other, but you didn't find it out till much, much, much later. But it was important to
Okay.
keep pointing out that she looked like her mother, who looked like her mother, etc.
The other thing that bothers me on that too is now that we do is the photo art, the cover art on books. Because now there's so much of it is literally photorealistic. It's models and a lot of these covers. And then they don't jive. Like the cover art doesn't look like the person that's described inside.
That's so weird when that happens.
Yeah, I just don't
Who
I don't like
the
it
author
at
didn't
all.
point that out? The editor? Who didn't point that out when they were making that to put that together? Like, this looks nothing like the main character.
I get it. If you're doing a romance novel cover, I get it. You got to have Fabio on your cover and whatever. Okay, I get that. But if you start getting into all of this, like a detective novel, and it's like, well, this is what my character looks like. And it's like, no. I'm going to decide what your character looks like inside. Keep it abstract.
Right. Make it a silhouette.
Yeah. I grew up reading Spencer novels. Robert B. Parker is one of my favorites, growing up. There was a TV show based on the series. So as you're reading the book, I kind of had the image of Robert Urich, who played him in the TV show. I'm like, so as I'm reading, but if they had put a cover art of a different, I'd be like, no, that's not. He doesn't look like Mark Wahlberg, in the new movie. It doesn't work, So that's one of my things, and I realize a lot of it is because now they have the cover mills and you buy the covers and stuff, but I'm not a fan of that. Not a fan of that at all.
That actually brings me around to that's the reason why if there's a book and they make it into a movie or a TV show, I have to watch the visual version first before I can read the written part.
Really? You can't do it the other way around?
No.
How come?
Because then I end up hating the visual one because it's not the same as the book.
Huh. I can do either on that one.
Really? I very strongly dislike whatever the movie, the TV show, if I've read the book first, because I'm like, they're doing this wrong. They're doing this out of order. Like, if I get attached to the book, I can't then watch the movie.
Yeah, I guess I'm lucky. I'm able to separate them. We'll see. Although we'll see what the new Dune movie comes out, because I'm a huge fan of that series. I've read, and
I'm very apprehensive.
I know I'm in the minority. But I like Brian Herbert and Kevin Anderson's books too. And I know that a lot of people have hatred for that, but I really do enjoy the
I grew up reading those books, and like the Foundation show on Apple right now. I know I grew up reading Foundation, and it's basically almost nothing like it, but for some reason I really enjoy the show and I enjoy the book.
Really? This will get you, because like you say, you have to watch the show first. I watched everyone was talking about Game of Thrones. And I watched the first season. I wasn't a fan, and I'm like, there's no way I'm touching these books now. There's no way. I can't do it.
Those books they're good, but they are kind of a slog because there's so much. So they are hard to read.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
and this is, I'm gonna lose my geek card for this, but like even like the Lord of the Rings books,
Uh-huh.
like I had a
They
hard
are
time getting
hard
through
to read.
those. Give me, I like my page turners sometimes. I mean, there was a time like everybody wants to pick up some, you know, Les Mis and be like, I read this. I get my badge now,
I
but
did that with that War and Peace. I did that with War and Peace. That was my badge.
yeah, I like page turners. I don't think there's anything wrong. I like my Clive Cussler books. I like my Robert B. Parker books. I like Dune books. Like looking at my shelf behind me, like, what else do I have pulled out right now? But I also like, I'm also a fan because I'm a fan of history and all that. So I like
Mm-hmm.
my nonfiction books. I like little factoid books where like there's like 2 pages on some subject and you get to walk away and have a little sense of completion. I've written
Right.
those. I like them. Um I don't think, I think here's my little pontification moment. I
Mm-hmm.
think that sometimes in the literary world we get very judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
It's the literary version of, how do you like the Beatles? The Rolling Stones are better. I hate you.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I think we get like how many people do you know who have all of these copies of books on their shelf, that they're on the shelf because they want people to know that they're on their shelf? They've never
Mm.
cracked the spine. There's dust on top of them, but
I've
hey,
definitely
they've
met
got
those
East of Eden.
people. Yeah. I'd be
They
like,
got
oh,
they
you
got
have that. Did
Slaughterhouse
you like
Five.
that? And they're like, oh, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, but I've been coming to your house for 20 years and that book's been sitting on the shelf the
Yeah.
entire time.
It's
And
like, oh,
it's
I
like,
finally read this book.
yeah, and it's, you know what, I'm not ashamed to say, like, I'll sit down with a detective novel and blow through it in, in an afternoon, because it's a page turner.
Mm-hmm.
It's not heavy duty, but it's a fun story. And isn't it about the
Mm-hmm.
storytelling? It's not a
Right.
test to see what your literary level is. So, and I think we should all challenge ourselves, and I think we should always try to read something that's challenging, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
ideas or presentation or what.
Mm.
But
You're making me
I just don't
tired.
want to get into this pettiness,
I read for
what?
I was like, I read for pleasure. I have to, that's my downtime for my brain. I can't read anything like heavy. I have to just, I need time to turn off my brain to read a damn story.
Yeah, you know, you don't want to sit down and like, what are you reading tonight? Oh, well, Hotel Rwanda, the novel.
Yeah.
No, that's sorry. It's not
No.
my thing.
Yeah. No, I'm reading the
But
latest sci-fi book I picked up at the library. Thank you very much.
yeah, exactly. That's why we have beach reading. Come on.
Hmm.
There's a whole thing
Do you
for it. So.
find as a writer and going back and reading somebody else's stuff? I know this happens to me. I think it happens. I've talked to some other people. It happens to them as well. That it takes you a couple chapters to get past your nitpicky brain. Like the first couple chapters, like, oh, well, I don't like the way this sentence is laid out, and I don't like the way this paragraph. But you have to like force yourself somehow to get into the story, so you actually get into the story.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Even with writers that I like,
Mm-hmm.
because you change. And if you're always reading something different and everybody has a different style, um, the one thing that's really that I'll get nitpicky about, and I'm getting better about it, is I don't care how good your editor is, even, they could be Random House or they could be somebody, they always miss something. There's
Mm-hmm.
always some,
Right.
some
And
grammar.
of course, that's the
And
one thing your brain's going to trip over while as you're reading.
exactly, and you suddenly turn into a sixth grader who feels like they caught their teacher messing up the thing on the test, like, oh,
Yeah.
Miss Johnson, look, you missed a question on the thing. And I used to be like that. Now I read it and I'm like, now that I have Viking Dog and I'm publishing other people's works and I know the process, I feel for them. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, damn, they missed one. Oh, well. But, we're not perfect. And you realize
Right.
the older you go back, if you pick up an old book from like the 40s or the
Mm-hmm.
50s and start keeping track of the editing problems, you'll get a long list really quick. They didn't care quite as much, especially the old pulp
Right.
books. But yeah, there's times like it'll take me a chapter or two to fall back into into the
The
pattern.
reading
You know,
mode.
that
Yeah.
happens a lot. Yeah, and then but it's like an old sweater. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
slip into it and you're like, okay, that's why they tell it this way,
Right.
whatever.
And eventually it
With
happens to
new
me without
authors
even
though, it's harder.
realizing it. Yes, I agree. New authors. Yeah. Especially if it's a new book or I hate to say it, like self-published and maybe they didn't have all the editing done they should have had or something. I don't know. I kind of go into hyper author mode at that point and I have to like literally force myself to not stop reading, just keep going to get into it.
Yeah. Well, it's that I must have rewritten. I couldn't even give you a number of times I rewrote the opening paragraph to Ascension. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I don't even think dozens would do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I honestly would not be hyperbole if I said it was over 100 times,
Yeah.
because that's your entry point.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
And you're
don't
always
enter
worried
in
it's not
smoothly.
right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and how many times have you picked up somebody's book and you got through like the first page and you're just like, it's just, I'll try it
Mm-hmm.
again tomorrow, or I'll try to, you know, and then sometimes you pick it up again and you're like, oh no, I just wasn't in the right mindset. Other
Right.
times
That's
you pick
happened
it
to
up, you're
me.
like, yeah, no, I'm going to pass on this one. You know,
That's even
it's,
happened to me. I'm turning my story into a serial podcast episodically.
hmm,
And even now I'm looking back. I just read today. I did chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm like, oh, I want to change this. Like, I don't like the way this works anymore. That's awful because I can't
yeah.
obviously do anything about it.
Well, there's always director's cut, I guess.
I suppose.
But it's I know what you mean though. It's tough now because self-publishing is really this like double-edged sword, because
Hmm.
you know we've gotten to a point where publishing as we knew it is gone. It just doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
You know, the idea of it used to be this it, it it used to be this anointing. And, you know, it's like you are your book. They would come down from New York and they would put their hand on your head and they would say, your book is a viable
Hmm.
vessel of reading, and
Hmm.
we are going to publish it. You are now officially an author. And
That's
everybody was
gone.
striving for that. Yeah, that's totally gone. And now it's like,
That's a
if you
fiction if
don't,
it ever even existed.
yeah. And I was working with an author on a project who, it was the estate of a Western author,
Hmm.
and they had I want to say over 200 books at this point
Okay.
under his name, and then now it's a ghost written by
Hmm.
someone else. And they were telling me, they're like, when they first started coming out, he'd been writing since the early 80s, I want to say late 70s, early 80s. He's like, he was the darling. He was the because he was popping books out, making money.
Hmm.
And then suddenly they said, no, we don't want to publish your books anymore. He's like, I have million sellers. And they're like, nope,
Right.
not anymore. You know, that's just not what we're going to do. So they ended up opening up their own publishing company and self-publishing the
Right.
novels now. And I think the problem is you can self-publish, because or you can create your own publishing company, and that's what I ended up doing with Viking Dog. Viking Dog, my
Hmm.
company is we do film, we do books, and we do podcasts, and then we also have motivational apparel that we do. I know there's a reason we went that way,
Uh-huh.
but I kind of compare it to like Dwayne Johnson or Jason Momoa. It's like, you know, you have your different areas that you work in, your
Hmm.
pillars. And but I operate it like it's a real publishing company. It's not that I operate it like one. I run it as a publishing company because that's what it is.
Hmm.
But the avenues that are open to me are the same that are open to anyone else when you go out and publish. And it's just a matter of how you approach it. And I think too many people go to self-publish their own stuff and they don't approach it like a business, and they don't approach it like a
Hmm.
professional. They think,
Yes.
oh, the word is what's important. No, cover's important, editing's
Right.
important, promotions are important, you
I find
know.
that's true with a lot of people. They don't approach what they want to make them money as a business. And they forget that marketing goes into it, and there's this whole background. You got like the website issues you have to deal with. I mean, it's just, they forget that there's all these layers under it, that they still have to do all that work.
They just think they're going to throw the book out into the ether and it's going to fly. It's
right.
like, who's going to review your book? What do you mean? I have to get reviewers? How are you going to get copies to them?
Right.
I have to give them copies. There's a whole system that you have to do. And it's that innocent artist idea of, if I build it, they will come. And it's like,
if you write something clearly, it's like perfect.
Yeah, it's and sometimes that happens. Sometimes people get, lightning in a bottle, and they accidentally left a copy on Oprah's coffee table or something, and she picked it up, and suddenly they're on TV.
Seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how it happens. They're walking down the street, and somebody said, "You look like an author. I'm going to make you famous."
No, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think people, I mean, this at this point, you've got book lists and you've got newsletters, and there still are ways that you get out to authors. That you get out to readers, and it costs money. They don't do it for the goodness of their heart. They're making money.
You have to spend money to make money.
Exactly. And the problem is, and this sounds it just sounds harsh, but it's got to be said. It's like, because you have a story, it's got to be so important. It's got to be vital. And while I think there is an entire industry, there's an entire industry out there of people who churn out 30-page erotic novels about interspecies romance, and they sell, but there's an audience for that.
Right.
And if it's like the book that I was talking about, the one that's in the drawer. There's a reason it's in a drawer, because there isn't an audience for that book. It's not a vital story that needs to be told. And I think people need to look at their writing, and I'm not telling them not to write. I'm not telling them not to self-publish. I'm not telling them get it out there. I'm telling them to make sure that you get out the best possible thing that people want to read. And if that means that it needs a new edit, if that means that you need to show it to a couple of people and get some honest opinions before you get it out.
Beta readers are your friend.
Exactly. So, but I think you're eventually going to see some sort of a pushback from the platforms, some kind of quality control, which is kind of scary, because suddenly they're the tastemakers. But I mean, they're starting to do it with independent film already. Amazon is going through and purging films that they don't believe are of the quality that they want.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Especially documentaries, and part of it is quality. Part of it is this really true? Part of it is it's just taking up space. They're going through and cutting a lot of them.
Part of my brain they're saying, is this going to make us money?
Yeah, exactly. They claim that, it's quality control. But I could see that happening with books as well. They already went through and pulled certain ones due to cover content. There were some things that came up, but I could see that. And that's kind of a scary thought, because that's starting to get into censorship. And once again, you're getting back into the anointing. How do we get on that subject? Suddenly we're talking about censorship.
Know.
What the heck?
I don't know. Well, we probably should take this point
your
to
podcast's getting
down.
Away from you.
On that note, let's close this up.
Okay.
All right. So last question of the evening. What's your writing excuse? Why are you not writing today?
Today I'm not writing because my writing excuse is there's not enough time today, that I know that what I need to work on is going to take multiple hours, and I only had like an hour to do it. So instead of sitting down and at least working for that hour, I made the excuse of, no, it's not enough time. I'll put it off until the next day when I have enough time. And now that I've said that out loud, I feel like a really, really horrible person. Wow. I'm a bad writer. Bad scripting. But that's part of what I saw about it. I'm at this point on the project where there's major things that need to be done, and
Mhm.
it's not just drop in and play with it for a little while.
Right.
It's literally figuring out
It's spending quality
problems.
time with your project.
Yeah. So it's literally like I need like a good 4 or 5 hours to sit
Mhm.
down and just dive into it. And I had, what did I have, a podcast to do today or something like that? I think I had to
It's
talk to some woman on the East Coast. So anyway, um, yeah. So that's my excuse. It's in a notebook. It's sitting there glaring at me, telling me to pull it
Mhm.
off the shelf and get to work. But yeah, that's my excuse. It's pretty sad. I'm
Okay.
I'm I'm
I
I'm
think it's a valid excuse. I feel like I have the opposite problem right now personally. I've been working so hard, I haven't taken any time to relax, and I'm gonna burn out in a minute or two. When I say a minute or two, I
oh.
mean like in a week or two. But
Well, you just got to find the time and not make the
hmm
excuse. But I mean,
I
do you enjoy the process though, right?
yes, absolutely.
Because I know some authors who absolutely hate the process. And I'm like, why are you
No,
doing this then?
if you hate it, why are you trying to make a living out of
I
it?
don't I don't
Jeez.
know. I don't know. They're like, oh, I just hate sitting down and actually doing the writing. I just like finishing it. And I'm like, well,
I heard someone say something back when I was young and I was doing the writing thing as like I don't know like a college student or teenager. I heard someone say that if you want to be an author to be an author, then you're in it for the wrong reasons. If you want to be
mm,
an author to have written, I guess I think that I might have butchered it. If you want to write to have written, then that's the wrong reason.
that makes sense. That I can understand that. There's if you have like I think with me, it always comes back to, and this goes back to being a little kid, is I always wanted to be heard. I
Mm-hmm.
always believed that I have, and I still believe this, that I have things that are important to say, and I have thoughts that are important, and I have a way of looking at the world that I think people would find interesting. And that goes
Mm-hmm.
all the way back to being a child. And uh, I'm lucky because I've had many different ways to express that through writing, through acting, through producing, through directing, through journalists and all of these different ways. And one thing I've learned is sometimes it's better to use a different skill set to tell the story that you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think writers are like, oh, well, it's a round peg, square hole. I'm going to make this go in there. And it's like, well, maybe it'd be a better film, or maybe it would be a better podcast, or maybe it would be
Right.
better as a comic book or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's part of the process as a creative person is servicing the story through the proper medium.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think I've read some books where I'm like, this is a horrible book, but man, it make a good movie, or vice versa.
Uh-huh. I've
You
had
know,
ideas where like, man, this would be an awful novel, but a great graphic one.
yeah, exactly. Or other ones where you're like, you hear somebody's gonna do it. Like we talked about Dune, and
Mm-hmm.
here's a great example: is books are amazing. We won't get into the other to some of the past films,
Oh, hey,
but
I like some of those past films.
the Sci-Fi Channel one has the
That's
Sci-Fi
the one
Channel
I
2.
liked.
You just
Mm-hmm.
like seeing the what's his name, McAvoy in the second one, and everyone's like,
Oh,
oh,
he
he's
wasn't
he's
that,
still got
wasn't
his hair.
he?
Yeah,
No,
he
I
was he
liked
was
I
Leto.
think they like did a good job on the worms. I really liked that.
It was weird because it was a hit or miss because some of the budget constraints definitely come out. There were a few
Mm-hmm.
where you could see the back wall of the soundstage in a couple shots, and
Oh, really?
but
I was
yeah,
too
oh
young, I
yeah,
didn't
there's a
notice.
few. There's a few. If especially the first one, there
Uh-huh.
you can actually see the back wall of the soundstage, and there's some where they use the same footage a couple of times. You catch it as it
Oh,
goes through.
really? I haven't
I've
watched
seen it
it in
like a bunch of times.
ages.
I don't. But they're now doing comic book versions of the books,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm kind of like, I thumb through them and I'm like, this doesn't really lend itself to a comic book in my opinion, because it's so
Mm-hmm.
dense and it's got so
Right.
many different
It's
ideas.
got a
And I
lot
was
of
looking at,
backstory.
yeah, and I was looking at the way they were doing it, and I'm like, god, it just feels like they're blowing through the story,
Mm-hmm.
just really quick, and you're not going to get all the background stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but the visuals
None of the
were
details
cool.
visible.
Yeah, but that, again, that's my opinion, and I'll
Mhm.
probably give them a read. But yeah, sometimes it's just you got to find your medium. Ascension would make a great movie. I'm just saying. But we'll get to that point. Everybody's read it said that. They're like, it's like a movie. I'm like, okay, I did my job. I was telling you a fun tale with some metaphysical stuff we've woven in there, some interesting ideas, and you liked it. I'm like, cool. I did my job.
Awesome. I'll have to figure I'll let you know what I think when I get around to reading it. It's on my list, but I have a long list.
Oh, I get it. Don't worry.
I'm one of those people that have like literal stacks of books, and it just keeps getting higher because I keep taking out more from the library than I do actually return.
I know the feeling. I've got a stack on my desk too.
So do I.
I'll get
I'm
to
looking
them
at
all.
6 of them right there.
Get to them all. I miss living in Chicago. I used to be able to ride I live in LA now, so you got to drive everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I love podcasts, but I'm not a huge audiobook person.
Right.
But in Chicago, it was always nice. You ride the subway and you bring a book. You could always read, and I kind of miss that. So yeah, but
I miss reading. I have 2 kids. I don't read much anymore.
You don't read Goodnight Moon to them?
No, I do those. Yes, but I don't get to read a lot of the mom books.
Oh, well, they'll grow up.
Eventually. No, the hope is they grow up and then they start stealing my books like I used to steal my dad's books.
That's the hope.
Mm-hmm.
If you raise them right.
Yeah.
All right. Just get them into. What do you have? Daughter?
One of each.
One of each.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew.
So my mom says.
I don't have kids, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I grew up on.
I am not a mystery fan, so I have some Nancy Drews because my mom bought them for me when I was a kid and never read them because I don't like mystery.
Oh.
But they're in the house. The kids can read them if they want to.
How old are they? The kids?
4 and 5.
Oh.
They haven't really learned to read yet.
Well, they'll get it. You're going to force it down their throats, whether they like it or not. You're going to read this, Sartre, and you're going to love it. Because hell is other people.
All right. On that note, have a good night.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Viking Dog Entertainment is a proud supporter of wolf rescue organizations and sanctuaries. They donate a portion of all proceeds to wolf rescue efforts. They also have a line of wolf-designed t-shirts and provide 100% of those proceeds to charities. Don't forget to join me Friday when I'm going to be doing a reading of Carrie and Chuck's The Nine. They've included a free download link, so those of you who listen to the episode, you can check out the show notes, and there'll be a free download link if you want to read the rest of the book rather than just the first chapter. And next Wednesday, when I'm going to be talking to Jessica Riley about dystopian novels. Until then, keep reading, keep writing, and go do what you do best. You got this. Read and Write Podcast is edited and produced by Deborah Z. Barth. Theme music was written and performed by Zed Bradley. Audio effects were created by Red Octopus and Black River Phonogram. Show notes and previous episodes can be found at readandwritepodcast.com. If you'd like to support the podcast for just $1 a month on Patreon, I'll give you a personalized shout out on every episode. So shout out to the Readers and Writers Tribe, Sea-Kid, Dos Rios, and Pikachu. Special thanks to my guests, Eric Paul Erickson, and all the subscribers who make this podcast possible.